Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you, as always, from the Xtreme Studios in the Pinos Palace, just west of Orlando, Florida. And I have also from Central Florida, the young 20-something Professor Pixel. Tonight, we're discussing Season 1, episode by episode of the Canadian TV show Forever Night. Episode 3, For I Have Sinned, and Pixel is the young 20-something that's watched 1,225 half-hour episodes of the original Dark Shadows, as long as being online doing the revival, Twin Peaks, and many other TV shows with me, episode by episode of Season 1s. We're starting off on this Canadian TV show filmed in Toronto about a vampire who's been around approximately 800 years, who's what I like to call progressive. And with the setup, when we covered the first 2 episodes last week, was this. You have Nick Knight, a vampire turned, where he's being presented in what I would call a very progressive format. In the 90s, we'd see a change in print and on screen, whether it's small or big, vampires turning from, feral, sexy beasts to 150-pound soaking wet, maladjusted, whiny boys, a.k.a. Anne Rice. And that's okay because they were used as a vessel to display what's going on at the time. In the 90s, people were very mopey. So when this show came on, first on CBS and then later on, I think USA or the other channel, some other channel, it was interesting because a lot of the things that we talked about with Buffy and Angel that would get popular in the 90s and the aughts, kind of, you could almost argue, started with this portrayal here. And I got to say, the lead guy here, the more I'm watching him, Geraint Davies, however you pronounce it, I looked him up. He's part Welsh. That explains his greatness, because I'm going to talk about it here. But so far, I think this is a pretty good episode of this third one here, For I Have Sinned. It's about a ninja-looking killer who doesn't like the fact that women like to have sex. And there's a Joan of Arc thing going on here, too, as a separate storyline. So those are my first impressions. I know you usually like to take it in. Do you have any impressions before you get us going?
I was very intrigued in the... Because I'm a sucker for, if you have a creature that's living for over any amount of time, that's like over 100 years, where they sit with historical figures is always fun. And so going ahead and, oh, well, yeah, Joan of Arc, I know her. He says it so casually, too. It's great.
Yeah.
But no, I guess we should go ahead and go into the episode itself. We begin with a sin. We see this woman making love to this security guard for like a mall or something. And
they're making sweet love.
Sweet.
But the problem is, and I love lingerie and the tease of sex, which we don't have anymore on television or movies. She's banging the security guard. She's a good-looking woman. Dude's not bad-looking. But we see her getting ready to leave, and she puts on her wedding ring. She's having an affair.
Yep. She's married. So she is committing a great sin. But she goes ahead and she puts on her cross hanging right there, and then goes out. And as she's getting ready in her car, about to go, who's that in the back seat? Chucky! No, it's our murderer.
Bad ninja mask.
Yes, a very bad ninja mask. And she's murdered. That's pretty much what we can say. She is laid down, laid out. They go ahead and draw a chalk outline, and she's done up like she's been crucified. And she is also suspiciously low on blood, which Nick and what's the partner's name? Shank?
I almost said Skank, but yeah, Shank.
They were at the Raven because Nick was following up on seemingly connected murders before they got a call to see this woman who's committed a sin. And eventually Shank goes in there, and one of the vampire ladies that works for Nick's old flame goes ahead and tries to make a move on him, start a conversation, and that's when Nick notices him, because he almost gives in to the temptation of blood again, because he's a vampire. It's going to happen. But he goes ahead, he rescues Shank. They have a little bit of banter because Shank's like, Whoa, what are you doing? Why'd you get in my way? Why'd you cock block me? I could, my father was a cat. His father was a cat. It's in the blood. I could have gone ahead and scored there. And Nick's like, you don't have that in you. And then they go to the scene, and Nick's pretty much horrified, but also it's probably the blood that's being exposed. What little of it there is.
Yeah, so we get our opening gambit here, and like I say, it's interesting because this guy doesn't appear too tall relative to her, and she may be in heels, but she's a good 2, 3, 4 inches taller. She's a stunner. She's a very good-looking woman, and I wish these episodes we're seeing on YouTube were high def. It's very difficult here in the United States to find them. If they're on Amazon available for purchase, but only in standard def, and a lot of other alternative outlets don't seem to have it, and it's a shame because I think this would appear even better. And again, the aspect ratios of the way TV was filmed back in the days and the colors and all that. It's interesting because we're getting to see a city we're not used to on television, Toronto, and we see a lot of it at night, but we see, some set pieces during the day. It doesn't look like an expensive show, but it's good enough where we're seeing the fact that, okay, we get the point here. A couple of women are just brutally murdered, and we don't really get to see them, and we don't have to. The hint of it is enough, just like, some sounds of them kissy facing and all that lingerie, and her hat with the cross that we see on her sweaty breast that she puts on, not too subtly. We don't see crack or for her breasts. We just see it there on her chest. So they're being very adult-like in their presentation of the female form here. And I think it's kind of interesting here because I mentioned for the first 2 episodes with the sidekick character, I don't know if I necessarily want to call Shank he seemed like a good guy and a decent guy. He seemed like he was there for yucks. I don't know where they're going to go with him, but I didn't think he did a bad job in his role. And I know you didn't like it as much as I did here, but what I thought was interesting when they were here at the Raven is a couple things. One, I'm popping because when the killer's in the back of the car, before we cut to the Raven, he's like, "You don't deserve to wear this." The way he's talking, it's like, "Oh, you creep." It's not scary. It's just, and it's not too campy, but it's just on that edge. And when they're in the Raven, I'm watching this. When they get into the Raven, they take the camera and they move it at an angle a little bit, so it's kind of weird, funky, like you're in a haunted house. Angles, the way I can describe it. And he's talking with the same chick that he was turned when he did way back in the day, and she's trying to she's fucking with him, right? Trying to make him taste a drop of blood out of her glass because it's a vampire bar. And he says to the one dude that's hissing at him, "We're like that, generations of immortality is no excuse not to brush your teeth." And it's like that's stupid, but I wasn't expecting it. But in addition to kind of okay, he's got a sense of humor and thinks sharp on his feet here. He doesn't feel threatened, and you realize you're in a vampire bar. So it kind of says, okay, there's a infrastructure of vampires here in this major modern metropolitan city of Toronto. And I like that because it's setting up the world without taking 20 fucking episodes to do it like they do in most movies and TV shows today. And when Shank comes in, he's like, "Bro, I want to give you some grade A ass that's in here, and it's okay if I fool around." I'm like, boy, if he said those same kind of lines in today's TV movies, everybody apocalyptic, right? But it's harmless. He's just whatever. And of course, we know there's going to be more to it than as the character goes. But I thought he showed a little bit of character in here. I didn't have a problem with it. I think when they discover the bodies and everything, and one thing I will say is here for a TV show, things are moving pretty quick. When they get to the scene of the crime at night, it's a crucifixion pose where she's laying down with her arms out, almost like an angel pose or whatever. And the one thing I have to say about the actor is I mentioned how I think the music's been incredible. The background keyboard organs type thing is phenomenal. It's really good. It's not campy. It's not too 1950s bullshit sci-fi. This is kind of angsty a little bit. It's just really good. And I told you I really love the opening, and it's true. And I thought to myself, I don't think the voiceover is by the guy that plays LaCroix, the head vampire. But when you talk, you're like, these guys are legit deliverers of the spoken word. So when he says he was brought across in 1228, preyed on humans for their blood, you're like, okay, that's pretty simple. But it's almost like he's holding it back and emphasizing keywords. He was brought across in 1228, preyed on humans for their blood. And you're trying not to laugh and be goofy about it, because if you do it and you're smiling like I am, it sounds different. The one thing I've noticed, the way he's talking to those lines, he's got chemistry with everybody verbally. in this episode. And I mentioned the very first scene we see in episode 1 with him walking into the museum there, where the reporter's going on him, and we see the vampire powers with him basically saying, "Go home." He's not being mean, but you can tell that's what he's doing. It's very delicate to do that, because on a stage you have to amp it up, whereas on TV and movies you dial it down a little bit. And so I think he's walking that fine line. But this guy is a stage trained actor. He's been in a lot of Shakespeare stuff. He knows how to speak and what to say, how to say it. So I really like it here, because when he makes the little flirty thing, and I wanted to share with you, this of course would be flirting, where she's basically trying to get him to take a drop of blood. He won't. And he takes her hand and gives her like a little playful bite. She's like, "Oh, ha, ha, ha." But you just see that expression on her eyes. She's a good actress and very sexy. When he's doing it, I'm like, what the fuck shot is this? There's a bunch of chains in front of him, on him while he's talking. I'm like, if this show's got a lot of weird, goofy stuff like in here, I'm going to love it, because it's just good stuff. It's like, it's dangerous in there. And then he doesn't believe it. It's like, okay, they're bonding. Even with the loser guy, he kind of likes him a little bit. But things, of course, get really, really serious here when we find out that it's going, where we have some different things. And the one thing too with what is it? Is it Jeanette? That's the no, Jeanette is the one that he was talking to in there. The medical examiner chick, the one he's kind of crushing on, that knows that's trying to come out.
Oh crap! What is her name?
She's basically making a comment about working on his transformation of becoming human, and she makes a comment about garlic pills. But we're going to see him actually like taking like they're a supplement. I marked out for that, right? But she basically is like, yeah, hey, I kind of screwed up with some stuff on this one here. You're right. It was a heart attack because of the stress on the body with all this blood being there. So we're thinking maybe it's not a vampire, but we're thinking about vampire bites. And she's like, here, she had a cross, and he like takes it. And you're like, okay, is he afraid of him? Is it going to burn him? We get a chance to find out more about the rules of what's being introduced in the show in the 3rd episode. So I'm kind of rambling here a little bit before we get to the church and we see the father and the confession from the killer. But I kind of like this here. We see him hold it and it burns, but it's not as bad as before. So it's kind of like whatever he's trying to do to turn is working. So I thought this was kind of cool. I mean, I don't know. It would have been very easy for them to really not recap his history, but they tie a storyline into what's going on from the past in the present. And I do appreciate that as like an A and B subplot. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I do too. Because when we go ahead and start with these flashbacks, it's kind of unclear. Like, okay, well, I get that. I get that he's not feeling well. Go ahead with the garlic pill and all that, but
it's so stupid.
Him go ahead and pass out, and then suddenly, oh, I'm just dreaming of this. It's like, okay, let's see where it goes. And I liked the confessional scene as well. It's one that's been done before, and will be done again. Where somebody's going to go ahead and confess the murder because they have the priest listening. It won't be revealed. Forgive me, Father. I have sinned, but in my sin I've done right. No, you haven't.
I am God's servant, and the guy's rambling on all this. And you're like, okay, holy killer, heard it, seen it. Who cares? Don't give a shit.
So we have to see as this young father goes ahead and he's trying to he goes to this older priest to ask, listen, I know, we got to go ahead and keep the sanctity of the church. Go ahead. All that, but what if this saves lives? Can't I break it for that? No, never. Says this old man.
I'm asking for a friend. That's what I'm thinking.
Asking for a friend. Yes, and so he gets his answer. No, you can't do it. And meanwhile, Shank goes ahead and he decides, you know what?
I want to get some action.
I'm going to go get some action. I don't care what Nick says. I'm going to go back to that club. The Raven. And he goes in there, he does his stupid dancing. God, he looks like an idiot. I have it up right now. But
But this is a
nope.
chick that was looking at him and he was trying to mac on. And so she's like, "You want to dance?" And she's got the accent and she's really good looking too and cute. And it's dopey, but you know what? That's when people did dance like that. They weren't twerking and all that shit back in the 80s and 90s and all that. At least not like this, right? And it's not a rave club, right? It's not as cool as Blade, but you can see where Blade might have gotten his inspirations because here, like I say, you got the weird blue light that you see in a lot of horror movies and atmospheric type shots, and then the background stuff. And she's basically saying, "I'm gonna take you to the VIP room and fuck your brains out." But you can't say that on television, right? He has no idea what the hell's going on, but we do, and we're
We do.
kill him. Thank you. Do it. Put him out. I don't hate him though.
But no, I
hate
don't.
him right now.
I don't hate him either. But you see, the thing is, he goes ahead and he is seduced back by this this vampire, and it's getting pretty steamy. Meanwhile, Nick has a connection to the priest because I believe it was the woman's necklace that guided him there. And he tries to see if he can get anything out of him. And the priest says, "No, I can't. I wish I could help. Can't." But that night on a sex phone line, we meet Magda. Magda and her friends, and she gets a strange call. You know, she's probably gotten some strange phone requests before, but this one, he's going ahead just like he was in the confessional. Oh, you live in sin, and God will have you burning in hell. And so yeah, that's pretty much a threat. And Magda goes ahead. She's leaving for the night. She's done after that. But who's waiting out there? Nick is also close to the scene, so he is able to intervene. But the killer goes ahead and gets away while he's protecting Magda.
Because he gets shot twice.
Thank you. That's right. I'm not there yet on the video side of thing. He'll be fine. Tis only a flesh wound. Yes, he gets shot twice. Killer runs away. And afterwards, Nick goes outside. There is a figure out there. Who could it be? Did he get the guy? No, it's the father. Father Pierre. Because he knew. He knows who the killer is. Knows what he's planning on doing. And they bring him into the interrogation room just to press upon him a little bit, try to get him to reveal, but Nick isn't getting anything. You have Dan, as I know him from Resident Alien, his chief, basically, who was like, "Okay, Nick, you gotta lighten up. He can't reveal anything. He's a good priest. He's not gonna do that." And that seems to be the end of it for that night, at least.
Yeah, interspersed with some of these scenes here is where we get the Joan of Arc subplot, because it's like, "Oh, you have a cross there." He's like, "Yeah, it was Joan of Arc's." And she's like,
"Oh my God, I love that."
I'm like, that is kind of cool, right? Because he lives
so casual
in his swinging singles bachelor pad. It seems not sparse, but I would say Spartan. There doesn't seem to be a lot of artifacts and all that. He certainly does not have a shelf full of leather-bound volumes or any collections of anything particularly unique, or like swords or skins or anything that would be manly or cool. It's just kind of, I'm a bit of a loser, but you can't really tell unless you're looking hard because it's kind of dirty and not used. And the fireplace he's got but doesn't. And I was going, well, wait a minute. It seemed like him and medical examiner are kind of having a thing. I don't know if I feel it that much in this episode, so I don't know if that's going to continue or not. I assume that it would, but sometimes after episode 1 or the pilots, you kind of, like I say, reconfigure because it's early on. So we'll see what happens there. And the Joan of Arc thing is interesting. What were you going to say?
Did you like because he goes ahead and, yeah, I love that casual bit, but we get the question, you know, it's always going to come up whenever you have vampires and a crucifix. Why does the cross, or why can't you be near a cross? What is it that keeps you away? And he goes ahead and he has a line about how it is the symbol of the one true light, and all vampires are creatures of the dark. It's great.
Well, I think the thing about it is this: when they're showing the Joan of Arc, he's basically like, you know, you're here, I'm going to turn your ass, and she's like, yeah, I'm not afraid. You know, I have my faith and I believe in it. She's a hot little number too. Don't know who she is, but she's got a nice little pouty look.
She's Joan of Arc.
I know, but I'm saying Joan of Arc.
I know.
You know, stoically speaking, she's kind of sexy here in the French Canadian sort of way because it is a show like that. But the thing is they're cutting between the giant cross that he's reaching out. And you see his hand in the Joan of Arc times where it's catching fire because he's testing himself out against it because he's relatively new at this time. And then, of course, it's interspersed and cut with him taking the one and putting it in his hand and grabbing it where it just burns him lightly, which we already kind of know. So I thought this was kind of a neat, interesting edit. And I tell you, the show is really at its best when you get these little snippets in there because they don't have to do the history thing, tying it to the future. But it's good enough. So it's not really a cop show where he just happens to be a vampire. It's really about what kind of situations we can be put in because at this time, some people talked about, you know, the AIDS thing going on from the 70s to the 80s and the United States government response to it, who's by a guy whose name may sound familiar from recent years. His name is Fauci. So you can argue the effectiveness of COVID and AIDS as being very good or very bad, depending on what camp you're in. But people don't realize he was responsible for both. So I will tell you, in the late 80s, early 90s, as pop culture was changing, there's starting to be the cynicism about public health because Magic Johnson, when he came out with AIDS, he was a basketball player, one of the top 10 players, maybe 20 of all time for the Los Angeles Lakers. When he came out with he had AIDS and he retired from basketball, that hit everybody, not just basketball fans, but it was mainline national news. Everybody at the time, because they didn't have cell phones, knew where they were at when that happened. It was that big that this iconic kind of person came out with it. So at that point, people became a bit more, I hate to say sensitive, but they definitely thought, well, how do we portray things because of AIDS? Like you wouldn't make fun of a subculture that, you know, that engaged in homosexual activity or whatever that you might have if you're watching old comedy bits even from people that are alive today. So the fact that they tried making Nick Knight very progressive, I kind of appreciate. And in here, like I say, him, you know, dealing with her, we go, okay, he's not a complete beast. You know, he's trying to like, you know, break her down, but I really like how she stood out to be strong. She was like, oh, no, please don't. I have to do. You know, she's like, no. And then it's funny because a little bit later on, when he meets her again and they're talking, he's like, you're once a hero. Now you're the villain. Something along those lines too. Like kind of like making fun of her. She's like, it doesn't matter. And he's like, shit, you got me. It's cool to see him. He's not immature when he's younger, but not many people get to be a vampire and get to understand what the roles are. So when the show is cutting between these back and forth things, it explains the current character. It explains how he is. We get to see that depth of what he has, and we experience it watching it as a viewer, where the characters around him, except for the medical examiner, don't know. So nobody's questioning the fact that he works the graveyard shift because they explain that he's got a photosensitivity to light that makes him sick, and there is a condition like it. But it's really good acting because he really acts a lot without having to say a lot of words or explain it. And again, you're cutting between Shanky, you're cutting between him, in this case, the sex workers, the Bob angle. So it's not like he has to dominate every scene, but he's so effective when he's in it. And I definitely get that here. Just when he meets the priest and they're having a little talk, and he's like, the priest is like, you want to come in and talk? And they're standing outside and it's cold. He's like, no, I don't mind the weather. And he's talking to her. It's like, okay, I get it. And late night sex things were a really big deal, 80s and most of the 90s, where you'd call up and pay for somebody to talk to you in any way you want. But it's interesting because I, again, don't know where this is going. Obviously, they're dialing up the romantic factor going back and forth. But we get a little bit of an angle here where it's like I'm asking myself, who's the killer going to be? Is it the priest? Is it someone else? Is it another vampire? We haven't seen LaCroix, which I believe was his name, the radio host, and I thought for sure he'd be in this one here, but I guess we'll get more of them. But we're here in the third act, and we're like, Okay. We see kind of like this bit of Shanky drinking and eating and watching the this Easter pageant that's getting set up or whatever, which is going to be the significant because it's the final piece here in this act. But there's a really fun scene that, depending on your mood of this particular episode, you might like or hate. Nick Knight is going to go to the church and stay there all night, so he's going to test his faith again on a grander scale. I'm like, oh god, this is so hokey. And he goes in there and he's struggling and he's having flashbacks and he's kind of stumbling around and he's getting ready to pass out, and he goes to a small room, and then when he wakes up the next morning and comes to, he realizes he's in the confessional booth, but on the side of not the sinner but the saint. And who happens to walk in to confess his lust-filled thing? Well, it's good old Shanky, and he talks in a really great Irish accent to him or whatever, and then Shanky kind of busts him, and then he busts his chops. I thought that was funny. This was a good
That was
scene.
very fun. Yeah.
I appreciate what they did here, and it reminds you, hey, wait a minute, they had a nice little feeling of dread going on with the killer and everything else there too, but to remind you that they can lighten up, they do this. What did you think?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed that scene a lot. I also liked the woman that went into it and woke him up in the first place.
Yep.
And oh, Father, what do I do? And so Nick's like freaking out for a second. So he pretends to be asleep, but she's like, oh, okay. That's okay, Father. Just rest. Why don't I give myself 20 Hail Marys, right? Bye. And then when Shank comes in and he's like, I gotta admit, I don't know the last time I confessed. Oh, tell me what ails ya. It's great. And after that, we should go ahead and mention that Magda was given police protection because
Sex worker.
Yes, she was given police protection. But you know what? She doesn't want police protection. So what does she do? She runs away.
Well, she plays the sexy angle, like, hey, I got to take a shower. I suppose you can't come in with me and, rub my back. And so I was waiting for him to call her on it, but she's like, well, maybe we can play cards and we'll come out, heart, something romantic. And I'm like, that's good writing. Because the guy's like, no, because he's doing an honor roll thing. He's like, I'll go out, wait here. She's like, okay. And as soon as he steps outside, like by the front door, she grabs her shit and bails, because the way the scene is shot, with them sitting on the bed and the bathroom door open, she's got a window right outside she can escape from. I'm like, oh, motherfucker, that's good.
Yep, she gets out. And then she goes... Where does she go? She goes to church, doesn't she? Following that?
What's that?
She goes to the Easter pageant.
Yeah.
But then following that, we have our... Listen, the episode doesn't even give him a name. He is just the killer.
Yep.
It's a generic serial killer that's like given no character. He exists only to be evil. But he does have a cool look about him, because he enters the church where Magda goes, and she's like sitting there for a prayer, and then who sits right by her? And it looks like it's a priest. It's not, though. It's the killer. And so he takes Magda and he crucifies her up, ready to burn her at the stake. It's getting intense. Nick realizes he's rushing out there. This is also flashing back to when he sees Joan of Arc burned to the stake. And
the guy's got a great line when he's getting ready to light her up, because it's the only time we see him do his vampire powers, where you just see like feet lifting up. So again, very low budget, but the guy's lighting the stick, and he's like, it's in the evening and it's on the cross, right? And he's like, of course, mirroring Joan of Arc. He's like, burn in hell, whore. It's so bad. I mean, but it's so good.
But Nick goes ahead and he like mops the floor with him. And so he leaps across the fire after contemplating, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I face my fear of that giant cross? And yes, he does. He goes, rescues her, brings her over to where it's safe. How did you do that? She asks. It's nothing.
Big bump of adrenaline.
Yep, that's all. And they've solved it. They have the killer. But there is a great bit here at the end when Natalie, is that her name?
Ellen
Yes.
Lambert, the
Natalie asks, so the cross isn't bothering you as much, like, because he's holding it in his hand for a second. Because Magda hands it to him, and so he's she asks, "Is it what is it? Is it like is it working? Like is our the treatment working, or is it a renewed faith?" And he says, "Maybe it's a little bit of both." Which I like. I like that he not giving a direct answer to which one, because he goes ahead and says it's the one symbol of the one true light. I like that. I like the religious angle to it. So to go ahead, but it's very weird to think about a vampire believing. But that's pretty much this episode for the most part.
Well, the thing about this little ending scene here is it's not, how do I say it? It's not as climactic as you might think, because this episode really has nothing to do about the killer. He's just sort of there, to your point, which I didn't know what to expect with that. The fashion thing that bugs me in this particular episode is while he's rocking the really light grayish, maybe white, oyster white turtleneck here, his jacket's got the cuff on it flipped up, but while he's standing around talking, went, look, the way it's shot, maybe it was just the way it's shot. It's just only half of it's up and the other half's down. I'm like, God damn it, that's sloppy. How did you guys not catch that? Because there's something to be said where you have the remaining 80s part of, big hair on women with shoulder pads in their outfits here. Because again, when the whore, the phone sex worker, gives the crossover, because there's no contradiction there to him. Yeah, it's kind of cool or whatever. But again, his ability to like change the speed of the way he's talking, like with her, or softens it up his voice to her. He'll talk like this to her and be gentle and reaffirming. And then with Shanky, he's kind of like a dude, bro. And then with Dr. Lambert, he's a little more of this. It's kind of cool, because at the end here you get one of those, what I call your what's the word I'm looking for? Your epilogue or whatever they're here at the end, where it's nothing here really matters for the episode, but you just have something tied to it, because they'll kind of stand around talking or whatever, and then he gets the cross, he gets the kiss goodbye, because the whore's obviously going to try to turn and leave. But I give her a week before she's back on the streets again and back on doing the nighttime work. And it doesn't really matter though, because the show's not about women having sex. And
it's a desk job. She's just sitting on a desk.
You're not going to catch any diseases when you're on the phone. So she's making the ends meet, of course. No single mom syndrome yet. But here, when he's talking, it's kind of interesting, because when he meets it with Lambert and Shanky's there too, Shanky's like realizes, I was talking a lot of shit. I do love my wife. Everything's cool. I'm not really trying to fool around with her. I wasn't out of my league. You're right. I mean, so you're like, he really is kind of a good guy. He just kind of was, braggadocious or whatever in a young sort of way, not filthy pig creep sort of vibe or whatever. That was just typical for there. And of course, the three of them are there talking. And I like the way they ended this, because to your point, the way he is pretty good. Where he's like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm hungry. Let's go grab something to eat. And he goes, I can't. He takes his glasses off. He puts them on. He goes, the sun's coming up. And then they end the episode.
And then he goes, and
That's
you
good.
You have the credits coming as the sun is going across the sky, so you know that Nick can't be out. And that's great. I really do think this is great. I really like this episode. I was surprised, because the first two episodes, they were good. This feels more comfortable though.
It's more fun. It feels like it's been established for several episodes, and you're just turning on and you know what's going on, is what it feels like to me. I agree.
Yep. I'm very pleased with this one. The only criticism that I really have is that the killer was nothing. Absolutely nothing. But the rest of the episode outshined that fact, so it didn't really matter.
It was surprising to me in that, again, we talk about TV being older, and while we've done Twin Peaks, Dark Shadows, Haven, eventually we'll probably do Millennium, maybe Incredible Hulk, or a bunch of other shows over the upcoming years. It's fun because older TV, it's more sharp, it's more concise, they pack more in. It's at a pretty consistent pace. Here you've got two real storylines. You've got the past, you've got the current one, you've got the characters matched around, but it's easy to follow. You know what the roles are. You don't have to know their names. You've got a little bit of building up of each one. We know why we like and don't like certain people. I mean, look, Shanky's not the best character in the world at all. I don't know that he needs to be in here, but I think they probably said, we got to have somebody here to break up the monotony of it just being by himself. And like I've said before, he's so great when he's on screen. It'd be very easy to get tired of him and have her overpowering it by being there all the time. And of course, we got to have the love interest, which we dialed back. You got to have his origin story with LaCroix and the chick that runs the vampire club. So already 3 episodes in, there's a history, right? There's something that's going on. When we did season 1 of Columbo, the original TV show, it was amazing because a lot of the people that responded to us, and there's a great many of them, they're like, oh, you've got to do the first 2 movies, which we skipped because they were movies, not TV episodes, and we did them. And it was amazing because at the time, they would show you the murder, and it was, how does he figure it out? Which sounds obvious, but at the time, nobody had done that before. Just like when you and I reviewed every episode and the movie, when we talk about Twin Peaks, all 3 seasons, which is rare. We normally don't do that yet. I'm telling you, at the time in the late 80s, like 88, 89, 90, when Twin Peaks came out, there was nothing like it on TV. And you could argue that Lost and all these other TV shows, even the stuff on cable television, owes their kind of debt to kind of be artistic and creative and Lynchian or whatever you want to call it to Twin Peaks, because people had no idea what to expect, how it was going to go, how you do characters. And you and I even talked about how some of the scenes just go on to give them something to do, and they're not necessarily pertinent to the story. And other TV shows just wouldn't do that. But here you've got, like I say, the club, you've got the backstory, you've got a backstory of his that relates to something present. We'd see a lot more of that on late night TV, whether it be Highlander or other TV shows. Definitely some science fiction B-level stuff was real popular in the 90s. But overall, again, a different presentation of how a vampire should be. Progressive is the word I keep using here too. I think the guy's incredible actor. I want to watch it because of him. And I'm getting just enough of him in these small doses that it carries me through the next couple scenes that he's not in. Joan of Arc was solid, and in a show that's a bunch of B-level actors, this is really well done so far. I hope it continues, and we'll see what happens next week when we cover episode 4. Any other final thoughts?
No, you summed it up pretty dang well. I'm excited to get into the next one.
Quick question. Week. What was the sin in this episode?
Adultery.
Correct, sir. Yes. Fornication. Outside.
Well, the fornication was also a sin, but it was the adulterous act.
Correct.
How dare you? How dare you? No, is not, because Lost Boys suck.
You might upset some people with that.
We've already discussed this. Yes, I don't care. I watched that movie. That is the movie to blame for what you say happened to
I agree, because you had that and you had Fright Night, and so to me that was the 2 paths the vampires could go.
I don't
Fright
think,
Night,
but Fright Night is so good with it. Like Fright Night has a balance, but that's another discussion for another day.
Yes. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Nick Knight and Forever Night, season 1, episode 3 for I Have Sinned. Check us out next week when we get on to episode 4. Me and the young 20-something Professor Pixel. I'm your host, Rob. Thanks for watching, listening. Have a good night.
Forever.
Oh, my goodness. Good night, everybody.
Forever Night is not a Dan Curtis production.